This video is sponsored by Care of. Oh, steaming cup of tea. That's what we like to see here. Hello, my name is Leonie and welcome to my channel. I always love hearing about someone's favorite books because I feel like it says a lot about who they are as a person and what they like, and it's almost like a little diary looking back at like all the different phases of their life and the different favorite books that came with that. So today I'm gonna give you all a little glimpse into my soul by giving you my favorite books of all time. So we're going to start with like my favorite books from when I was like a teenager and I just got into reading again, all up until the books that I would consider my current favorite books. Okay? And for every book I will of course let you know if I think you would enjoy it too, because you know, maybe we have different tastes. Okay, so my very first favorite book happened when I was about 14 years old and I had just gotten back into reading, and I had this little group of friends and we all were really into reading, recommending books to each other. And I remember one friend was constantly recommending this one book to me called The Hunger Games. And I didn't want to read it because I was like, The Hunger Games? I don't want to read a book about people that are hungry. That doesn't sound fun at all. And then one day we were in the cinema. I think we were watching probably like Breaking Dawn Part 2 from Twilight. And a trailer came on for The Hunger Games. And I was like, wait, this looks really cool. And my friend looked at me and was like, yeah, read the book. And I read the book and it was fantastic. And to this day, it's still a favorite of mine. Even though it's now like 12 years later. Dang. Classic young adult dystopian. I would still really recommend it if you would like a very high action, but still very intricate dystopian that is a critique of war, reality TV, and class inequality. So after The Hunger Games came that phase where all I would read was just dystopian books, and very quickly I found a new favorite, and this was my favorite book for I think my entire teenage years, because I came across this book where, whoa, absolute shocker, the main character was like actually cool and not a damsel in distress like a lot of the books were that I read at the time. And I think it was the first time that I read like a true forbidden romance between a human and an angel. And the book I'm talking about is Angel Fall by Susan E. I think you would love this just the way I loved it if you like YA dystopian with like slight horror elements. That's what really stuck with me at the time. I was like, wow, there's these children with very creepy razor teeth and they're all like weirdly mutilated. And it was really scary at points and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. I'm loving this dark tinge to it. If you're gonna read this, you do kind of have to accept another story of a girl wanting to save her sister because she's being abducted by like angels that are causing the apocalypse. Just classic 16-year-old afternoons. I'm really trying to be healthier by taking my vitamins every morning, and a really great help with that has been the sponsor of today's video, which is Care of. The most convenient thing about Care of is they have this really neat little quiz that you can take on their website, and based on that quiz, Care of provides personalized guidance with doctor-backed recommendations on what supplements you could take. These are the supplements that were the perfect fit for me. For example, I have a probiotic blend. 70% of the immune system lives in the gut, so that means that the probiotic blend can also help with your immune system. And because I'm a vegetarian, I'm also looking for vitamins that can kind of help my nutrient intake. So for that, I have vegetarian omega-3, which I know is super important for the brain and the heart. The well-known vitamin B12 to help with energy, and also zinc to help maintain a healthy immune system. The vitamins are sent right to your door in these super handy little daily packets, so it's super convenient for me to take one during my morning routine. You can also take Care of's quiz by going to their website, takecareof.com, to find out which vitamins are recommended for you. And you can use my code thebookleo to get 50% off your first order. So click the link in the description to take your quiz. And thank you to Kara for sponsoring this video. Then a series, well, needs a little bit of explanation first. I remember laying in bed like late at night reading and being so surprised by the plot twist in this one, even though it is kind of predictable. I also didn't give any of these books 5 stars. I think I actively disliked book 2 in the trilogy, but I still consider it one of my favorites looking back, because the Shadow and Bone trilogy by Leigh Bardugo was the very first high fantasy that I'd ever read, and looking back, it has shaped my entire taste in fantasy books. Before reading this book, I had this idea that like high fantasy, epic fantasy was always Lord of the Rings style, Renaissance, Middle Age, Europe vibes. This took place in like a fantasy version of Russia, and I was like, that's so cool. It has an elemental magic system, which I still absolutely love, mostly because of Avatar: The Last Airbender. A very interesting villain main character dynamic. And I think this is also the start of me always shipping the main character with the villain. Is this a fantastic fantasy series? No, but it holds a special place in my heart. And I also think that the show is kind of better than the books. Very controversial opinion, but then by the same author comes a book that absolutely, to this day, is still a favorite. Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. You would definitely like this if you'd like fantasy that takes place in an urban city center, because Ketterdam is so obviously based on Amsterdam, and being Dutch myself, it was so funny to read this book and see names like Joost and then randomly see words like Geldstraat, all these random Dutch words. Really enhanced the experience for me. And this book was also my first introduction into fantasy books with morally gray main characters instead of your kind of self-insert perfect female main character. You follow multiple point of views, and these characters just aren't afraid to rip other people's eyes out, and that just kind of changed my brain chemistry when I was 18 years old, being like, wow, I can read books about people that are kind of bad. That's so cool. You should still read this if you kind of want to get into fantasy, if you like books that focus on the characters, and if you like girls with knives and boys with hats and guns. This one and The Hunger Games are the only ones on this list that I've reread and still would consider a favorite. The next one is very interesting. It is Vicious by V.E. Schwab, and the sci-fi-ness of this book is kind of biology based, because we follow these two students that are trying to figure out if you can get superpowers from near-death experience. And I read this, I think, in my first year of university. Kind of forgot a little bit what happened in the book, and then I started rereading it while I was doing my master's degree in neurobiology, and that's when I found out that the subject focus of these characters is also neurobiology. Reading this book somehow primed me a little bit for being interested in that. This book further solidified my love for morally gray to outright villainous, morally wrong characters, as we have these two people that are just constantly trying to kill each other. They're constantly hurting the people around them. I mean, it's kind of hard not to if your superpower is that you can give people pain on command. Victor Vale would really hit it off with that girl from Twilight, played by Dakota Fanning. Oh, the sun is coming out. It's really cold out, but the sun is still shining, which is the best weather on Earth. This also really started my love for stories with a very tense and obsessive dynamic between characters, preferably like a rivalry, because we have these two best friends that through gaining superpowers become absolute arch nemesis, and there's something about that dynamic that just like, you know? I'm very good with words. So if that sounds good to you, you should read this. It's a sci-fi that really reads like a thriller. Okay, the next book I remember reading while I was sick during Christmas week. I think like 6 or 7 years ago. My parents were like watching New Year's TV, but in the meantime, I was reading this book and I was somewhere else. I was in a magical forest in a tower where big magic was being created and flowers were growing out of people's fingers because I was reading Uprooted by Naomi Novik. This is where I discovered that fantasy doesn't always have to be epic fantasy. It can also be very folklore inspired, very fairy tale-esque. This is technically a Beauty and the Beast retelling, but it's more so inspired by Eastern folklore. It has magical forests, it has girls with swords, it has kind of a villainy romance to it. It has that master-apprentice thing going on because the main character is being brought into this tower with this evil wizard and he's going to teach her magic. I think the trees talk. They're not very nice. That's how I like my trees. And it's a standalone fantasy. Extremely underrated. I think most of the fantasy that I read nowadays is this type of folklore-inspired standalone fantasy. Read this if you're okay with very vague magic systems. I personally really love it when the magic in a book is completely ungraspable and not understood. And the last one before we get to my current favorites, I want to say I read this at the perfect time in my life when I wasn't really sure what to do with my future, but I'm never really sure about what I want to do with my future, and I'm always kind of like low grade having a mental breakdown over that. So I can't really say I read this at the perfect time because I think I could have read this at any time and it would have been at a perfect time of being insecure about my future. But the book I'm talking about is Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. Now you may have noticed in like the entire list contemporary fiction is very not there. I think this is the only one in there. I do like contemporary literature. I really like Sally Rooney, but like a lot of it I don't love enough that I would put it on the favorites list. But this is one that I picked. Maybe I'm technically a little too old for this book because it's about a high school student, this girl who's like really good at all the academic things and then kind of gets into a crisis because maybe she wants to go into art. While I was doing my master's, this was just a really good thing for me to read. I think we all just have that book that in some way really did influence the choices that you made in life, or at least how you think about your own life, and this is one of those books for me. It's a book about academic expectations versus wanting to be an artist, doing what others expect from you and what you are made to do versus what truly brings you joy. So if those are themes that you sometimes struggle with, this book is fantastic. Please do not be deterred by the fact that it's young adult and is about a high school student. I think Alice Oseman writes in such an authentic way that feels so genuine that it is just still very relatable no matter what age you are. Sorry, I had to change up the light situation. Sorry that the lighting is really weird right now. Let's move on to what I would consider my current favorites. Like, these are books that I've read in the past 3 years. Let's start with 2 YA fantasies. The interesting thing about young adult fantasy is that although I mostly read adult fantasy, if YA fantasy hits, it really hits. Like, it's so fandomable. And one of my current favorite YA fantasy series is the Folk of the Air series by Holly Black. I don't think I've given any of these books 5 stars, but my gosh, they're just so addictive and fun. The first one is The Cruel Prince. I know I always talk about enemies to lovers, enemies to lovers. This has got to be the best enemies to lovers romance I've ever seen because they're actually enemies constantly trying to do each other harm. There's nothing more romantic than that to me. It has morally gray characters. I love fairies and fairy folklore in the sense of the very mean, horrible fae that are coming to steal your children. That's what this series has. They're mean and backstabby and scheming, and so is our main character. And I support that for her. I also really like that Holly Black subverts a lot of very common young adult fantasy tropes by using the moral ambiguity of the fae. And then my other favorite YA fantasy series, I don't have the first book because I lent it out, but it is the Gilded Wolves trilogy by Roshni Chokshi. When this came out, this series got a lot of mixed reviews. A lot of people just weren't really into it, so I'm very happy that I just bought it on a whim without really checking the reviews because it's amazing. If you ask me for my favorite YA fantasies, I think to me there's this holy trifecta, the holy triforce of The Folk of the Air, The Gilded Wolves, and Six of Crows. There's an interesting ensemble cast of characters. There's puzzles, actual puzzles that characters are trying to solve. It's like a whole escape from the tomb situation. It has a super vague but very unique magic system and so much mythology and folklore infused. Yes. My next favorite, if I could find it in this pile, it's quite a short one. There it is. I just have to take my moment to talk about how much I love short stories by talking about The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Yes, I know this is required reading for a lot of people in the United States, but I'm not American, okay? So I read this like 2 years ago. If, like me, you love themes of feminism, you love themes of mental health and how people are treated with mental health, if you love kind of surrealism, not really knowing what's real and what's not real, if you love seeing an author craft this beautiful and strong and poignant story with so few pages, you will love The Yellow Wallpaper. If you think you don't like short stories, trust me, I used to think that. It just means you haven't read a good short story yet, okay? Give this one a try. Then for nonfiction, because I do also really like nonfiction, but it's hard to be like, this nonfiction is my favorite. Like, oh my gosh, this piece of information about the world, my gosh, I loved it. But I do have one favorite, and that is The Tao of Pooh by Benjamin Hoff. It is basically just the main character talking to Winnie the Pooh, because apparently Winnie the Pooh is just an absolute master of Taoism and going with the flow and not forcing anything in life and not making things more complex than they need to be. It was actually a friend who recommended this book to me. She said that it always calms her down when she reads it, and that every time she rereads it, she gets something new out of it because it always means something different to her based on whatever she is going through at that moment in her life. And I have the exact same thing. Every single time I reread this, I can apply it to different aspects of my life, and I think I'm due for a reread. I think my life has like significantly changed to the point that I should read this book again. Read this if you tend to overextend yourself. Okay, then my absolute favorite fantasy series of all time. I read it in 2020. It was an extremely hot summer. We were deep in the pandemic. I was sweating on my little balcony and somehow decided what better to read right now than an apocalyptic fantasy about the world fighting back. And so I binge read the Broken Earth trilogy, the first book being the 5th season. It's got a unique magic system based on like earthquakes. N.K. Jemisin writes in an extremely recognizable voice. There's so much intrigue. It deals with themes of motherhood, oppression, nature versus humans. It's bizarre in some ways, which I love. I love a little bit of bizarrety. It's got that perfect blend between exciting and suspenseful and action, but then also it really makes you think and asks you to kind of like take this in slowly. There's not a single fantasy series on this world that I love more than I love this one. And with that, we have actually reached the final 3 books that I think I would consider my 3 favorite books of all time. You know, if you really held me at gunpoint and asked me to choose one, I would choose these 3 and die. The first one is a modern classic. It is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This is pure bliss, pure perfection, absolutely no plot, just vibes, which is exactly how I like my fantasies. What I love about fantasy is that you can just do anything. You can create magic within the pages by letting your imagination completely loose, and that's why I really prefer fantasies that don't really try to create rules for the fantasy or create a system for the fantasy. What I love about magic is that it can be completely anything, completely ungraspable, and that is what I love about this book. The entire time you just feel like you're dreaming. You just feel like you're watching a beautiful circus show with magic and you don't know what's going on. If you distill that feeling that a fantasy book can give you of transporting you to another world, that distilled feeling is this entire book just constantly. Then my second favorite book of all time is Bunny by Mona Wad. You can tell that I don't think I've ever tabbed a book as much as I've tabbed this one. I said that my favorite dynamic in a book is obsession, and I think this book does that really well. It tackles that I'm not like other girls feeling. It tackles like toxic female friendships. It tackles this codependency. It tackles that like obsession with each other and your image. Makes a little bit of fun of university in the meantime. And above all, this book is just like a surrealistic wild ride where constantly you're just thinking to yourself, is this real? What does this mean? What is the point of this? What is the author trying to say here? What is going on? And I love it when books do that. The author has done an absolutely phenomenal job at capturing these themes in very nuanced and I would say friendly way. But then also the book's completely bonkers. If you ask me what my favorite dark academia book is, it would definitely be this one. And then my final favorite book is another classic, and it is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I remember learning about the Bronte sisters in English class in high school and thinking to myself, oh my gosh, these sound so interesting. I'm so fascinated by these stories of like large mansions and like focusing on this like young woman. And I was so sad that we didn't get to read them for English class. Now, having read them, I totally understand why this would be kind of a level of English too high for like 16-year-old, 17-year-old Dutch students. Like, I understand why we didn't read these, but I'm so happy that I have now. The insane thing about this book is that you're reading something that you know was written 200 years ago, and yet it is so relatable. And seeing these insecurities that you have, these thoughts that you have, these longings that you have being reflected in this character from 200 years ago is so soothing, because it makes me realize that all these longings and emotions and insecurities that I have aren't just a me thing, which I think I already knew. It's also not just a right now thing. It's not just a me and my friends thing. It's a forever thing. People, women, have been dealing with these thoughts and feelings for more than 2 centuries. And that shows to me like, oh, it's just a human thing. It's not just a me thing, it's just a human thing. And to me, there's nothing more soothing than that. And then on top of that, just bringing the absolutely beautiful writing style, the wonderful romance in which both of the characters think that the other person is ugly. Love it. The gothic and atmospheric and kind of eerie vibes of it all. Truly a masterpiece of a book. Oh, and then I just wanted to give like a final quick shout out to, because I didn't talk about any romance books. My favorite romance books, I don't know if I would put them like on the list, but my favorite romance books of all time are the Brown sisters books. So Get a Life, Chloe Brown, Take a Hint, Danny Brown, and Extra Age Eve Brown. If you like romance that kind of fit that vibe between like quirky and not too serious, but then also just well-written characters and like actual good tension between characters, not just some hot dude and then a girl who's fawning over them, but like actual chemistry that you can see between the characters. This is the only series that has like truly captured that with every book for me. Okay, if you think, oh my gosh, I like your recommendations, subscribe to the channel and watch my other videos. I hope we can talk about books some more. I want to give a big thank you to all of my Patreon members that support me, with a special shout out to all of the elite Patreon members. And a warm welcome to all of our newest elite members, being Autumn Hops and Clara Elmquist. Welcome. If you join my Patreon, you get access to my book club. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you soon with another video very soon next week. Okay, bye bye.